Okay, so a little bit of review of yesterday. If you have a function, first of all, we know 3 ways to tell whether something's a function or not by now, I hope. I hope you know 3 ways. But here's a really simple one. 2x minus 5. Is that a function or not? Now, I don't have a y, but do you get that f of x is the same thing as y? So do you get that I have an equation that's only got one y equals blah, blah, blah? Then it's a function, for sure. If there was y squared equals, then it would not be a function, because when you solve that, you end up with 2 answers. You'll end up with the absolute value of y gives you square root of 2x plus 5, or minus 5, sorry. And then you end up with 2 answers for that. One's a positive equation, one's a negative, and that means this would not have been a function. But this one is. All right, so basically you got to know if things are functions or not from 3 different ways. One is you can check their points. One is you can graph it and see if it passes the vertical line test. And the last one is, does it just have one y equals? Then we asked you to stick weird things into functions yesterday. Could you please try this one, f of x plus h, going into this function, and tell me what you get? I will pause for a second while you give that a try. Multiply it all the way out and get a final answer. All right, so you should have said that I stuck, instead of that x, I stuck in x plus h. I keep wanting to say plus 5. Minus 5. So final answer, 2x plus 2h minus 5. Raise your hand if you had that one right. Okay, good. So you stick weird things into functions. Next, we graphed things. I'll show you one of those. We graphed things like this. And the 3-step process was, number 1, you can't graph it until you know what a is. You cannot graph that unless you know, go ahead, what a is. So what do you do for a? Well, you pick a small, simple number that qualifies. A is supposed to be bigger than 0, so we picked 1, and then you can graph that. And you remember doing this? We graph that, and then we say, well, couldn't a have been other things? Yeah, a could have been 2 or 3 or 4, and then I would have made it negative 2 and negative 3 and negative 4. And then we said, though, that you can't do the domain or range of that because x has been defined here. X has got to be less than 0. So I would have normally said the domain on this was negative infinity to positive infinity. But as soon as they told me x had to be less than 0, or no, bigger than 0. Yeah, less than, sorry, in the homework problem it said less than 0. If it had to be less than 0, then this whole side of the graph can't work. So it was from negative infinity to 0 would be the domain for that one, for example. All right, so that's one of the weirder kinds of questions that you have to be able to do. So if I was starting this, what's the first step? Pick an a like what? 1. A is bigger than 0, so I can pick 1. And then I put a 1 in, and then I figure out what the graph looks like. And then when it's all done, remember that the domain for this, you can't just look at the picture. Let's say the picture looks like this, and it's always stopping here or whatever. You can't just trust that. You got to look at what this says. This says that x has to be bigger than a half. So if my domain was going to be all reals, negative infinity, positive infinity, I have to change it to say, nope, has to be bigger than a half. So it would be from 1/2 to infinity or whatever. All right, so don't forget to make that change your domain. All right, so there's enough advice on the review from the last couple days. Now let's get into the new stuff. And that's part of the old assignment, sorry. Again, this is just a review of finding f of x, and then something a little more intense, finding f of x plus h minus f of h. All right, well, first of all, you'd figure out f of x plus h. We just did one like that. You stick x plus h in here. It's just going to be a little ickier. A little more to multiply out, right? But then you just multiply it out. Okay. And then what is this plus f of h thing? Or no, minus f of h thing. Well, you just have to stick h. It says f of h then, right? So you stick h into the function, and then you add that to it. at the end. Or, sorry, subtracted. It says minus. So I go minus, and again, I stick h into the function and put it in. All right, I want you to do one like that. So what I'm going to ask you to do here is, I'm going to give you a simpler one. Would you please figure out what is f of x plus h minus f of h for this function? Basically, you're going to get a whole bunch of terms. Some of them are going to cancel. And then you'll have a final answer. It's a big list of terms. I'm going to pause while we give that one a try. Okay. You really need good attention to detail in this class. And it's not like I don't mess up. I absolutely do. But if you mess up a lot on these little things, that's what's going to cost you on your tests. 9 times out of 10, when kids get their test back in here, they go, 2 stupid mistakes cost me a whole grade. It's going to happen. When there's only like 8 questions or 9 questions on a test, yeah, you get 2 of them wrong, it makes a big difference. And often it's just a negative. So get used to that. You're going to probably understand the general idea in here. It's can you be careful? All right. So I'm going to put x plus h in here. In where? Part of being careful is you always put a parenthesis where the variable was. Why? Because like, right, if I put a negative right here, a lot of people don't know what to do. They don't know if I make the x negative first and then square it, or, again, that's part of the devil's in the details kind of thing. I'm going to put the negative, if I had a negative there, I would put it here, and then it makes a big difference then, whether or not this whole thing is what you put in for x, or if it's just the variable. It's always just the variable, not the negative in front of it. Just the variable has a parenthesis. So if this problem did have a negative here, you would have a negative and then the parenthesis squared. Okay, I want to make sure you get that point. That's going to probably happen to you. Okay, so now I'm going to put in x plus h. X plus h. And next thing is, you can't fall into this trap. Oh, x squared plus h squared. Nope. It's x plus h times x plus h. That's got 4 parts. And then you add 3. Okay, so the answer is not x squared plus h squared plus 3. It is x squared plus 2hx, or xh, that doesn't matter, and then plus h squared, and then plus 3. There, so there's my 4-part answer to just this part. I'll rewrite it. X squared plus 2hx plus h squared plus 3. Now, I need minus, and again, you can't just afford to say, well, I was really close. If you don't have a parenthesis here, you might forget to distribute that negative to everything. Get what I'm saying? If you don't put a parenthesis for this guy, and you just drop in, okay, he wants f of h, so I'm going to say h squared plus 3. You'll forget that this negative has to get distributed to the 3. If you didn't do that, there you go. Even though you totally understood what to do, you would have lost the point. Okay? So that 3 has a negative. That means it'll cancel that 3. That's going to work pretty nice. And then this negative h squared will cancel this h squared. So then a lot of stuff canceled. Final answer is just x squared plus 2hx. Raise your hand if you had that one right. Okay, and a lot of people made a little mistake in there at the end, didn't they? I'm going to clean that up just a little bit to make sure you get what I just did. I put f of h, which was this guy with an h in it, and then there was a minus right here that became critical, and these parentheses, I think, are what cost a lot of people that point. Because you didn't think to put a parenthesis and then drop in the answer. Whenever you're about to drop something in, it needs parentheses around it, because those negatives will get you. All right, and then I'll actually multiply this all the way out. You get negative h squared minus 3. And I'm just going to rewrite all this just to show some of you had concerned looks on your faces. There's the whole thing. Now this and this cancel, and this cancel. They're all gone. That's why that's my final answer. Yes? All right, I'll go back to where that came from. Outside, hx. Inside, another hx. That's hx plus another hx, 2hx. Okay. All right, so be careful. Negatives cost people more points in this class by far than anything else. Most of the people that get B's, usually it's because of negatives, because they're not careful. Really. There's a lot of you with A's, and there's a lot of you with B's. And a lot of you that have the B's could probably track back to a bunch of negatives that they screwed up, and that's probably why they got their B. Okay, moving on. This is about making a function. I've always just said, here's your f of x function, but what if they give you directions on how to make it? Well, you always just start by, they want the function to be g, so that then we have g of x is, and then it's telling me what to do. In this function, it's going to make you add 4 and multiply by 3. So you always need an x in it, otherwise it isn't really a function. Well, actually, you can have functions that don't do anything. Okay, but you're pretty much always going to have an x over there. And it wants me to add 4 and multiply by 3. Can I go like this? Using green on top of that's pretty bad. I'm going to try again. X plus 4 times 3. Of course not. That would be too easy. This is honors pre-calc. So what's wrong with that? Why can't I just do that? Because when you go to do this problem, the first thing you would do is do 4 times 3. And then you just take your number and you'd add 12. Is that what they wanted you to do to your number? No, they wanted you to first, in this order, in sequence, they wanted you to first add 4. How do we force that plus 4 to be done first? Parentheses. Again, along with that whole negatives cost people a lot of points, parentheses are going to cost people a lot of points. Now it'll force me to add 4 first and then multiply by 3. So here's my final. It's g of x will be, always have an x, and then I want it to add 4 first, so I put parentheses around it, and then times it by 3. There we go. There's my function. Could you multiply it out and say 3x plus 12? Yeah, that works. Because that would be equivalent. Right? 3 times the x, 3 times the 4. 3x plus 12 is also okay, but I don't think either one's better than the other. I'll accept either one. And now they want you to find g of 5. Well, that'll be easy now, because making the function is the only hard part. Sticking a 5 in it ought to be pretty easy. 5 times 3 is 15 plus 12, 27. Done. Now they said g of x. Well, that's what we work so hard to make up here. That guy. So what is g of x? I'm going to leave it as the x plus 4 times 3. I'm going to put the 3 at the front. You don't have to, but cleans it up a little bit. Okay, so the new thing for today so far, besides a lot of review, the new thing is making a function. And then being really careful when you do something like f of x plus h minus f of h. Especially watch out for that negative. Especially remember to put parentheses and when you drop in something in here so that you distribute that negative to both parts. All right. So then, this one. It wants me to take this function and multiply by c and add t. The new function, called g of x, is going to be the one that takes this function and multiplies by c and then later adds t. Would you try to write that function for me, please? G of x starts with x cubed because it says to. How do I make it multiply by c first and then add t? Times c here or times c after it. Either way it would work. Because multiply is going to naturally come before you add t. Do you need parentheses around that to make it go first? No, it's going to naturally do that. And then you add t. There you go. Raise your hand if you had that one right. Okay, good. Now that's your function. Now you're supposed to find g of 5. Now it freaks people out sometimes because they think they're supposed to get an answer like 12. If I stick a 5 into this g function, where does it go? Does it go into c? No. Does it go into t? No. It goes in for x. So they're saying to put a 5 right there. And yeah, the answer is going to have c's and t's in it. That means it's in terms of c and t. Final answer, can you do 5 to the third in your head? 125. C plus t. Normally you put the number before the variable. C times 125 is the same thing. If you said that, I'm okay with it. And some people are like, is that it? Because you think you've got to have a number answer. It's okay to have it in terms of C and T. This one, you just stick C into this function that we created here. And then you just subtract T at the end. And the subtract T will cancel out the plus T. And that cleans up a little bit. All right. Anyway, good enough on that. I think you got everything you needed. And let's find your first few problems here. This is your first problem of your homework. And it's basically saying, let's make an f of x function. And remember how I said you pretty much always start with an x and then you do stuff to it? Okay, and then it tells us what to do. It wants us to multiply by 2, add 3, and divide by 4 in that order. That's the key. Anybody can go times 2 plus 3 divide by 4, and it'll be totally wrong. It's just trying to get it to happen in the right order. Okay, same thing for this one down here. These are good to practice. So it's kind of weird just thrown in right in the middle of that. Let me see where else. Okay, this is just a review of 12 important functions, which I don't know if I have time to do today. Okay, I'm really confused. Hold on. And it's domain. Okay, I think I need to do domain today. Oh, I remember. This is the one where the assignment doesn't actually start until like page 39. My bad. The other one, those are, I'm just going to assign one of those two. Just do the first one of those. I know that's weirdly separated from everything else, but it is something that we test you on. Okay, so do the first one. And now here's where the assignment's really going to start. And I need to talk you through one more thing. And that is figuring out domains of, these are called rational functions. Rational functions can be written as a fraction. So these are basically fraction functions. Do you get, I think I told you this the other day, the difference between 0 over 1 and 1 over 0. One of them's okay, one of them's bad. Which one's bad? 1 over 0. Don't ever let it be like that. Okay, then it implodes and the world ends for that function. Just like apparently is going to happen on September 23rd. 2 days from now, tons of predictions for the end of the world. Have you guys seen that? What I'm talking about? In case you hadn't heard of it, there's a bunch of people out there saying the world will end on the 23rd. And I totally get that they sincerely believe that, and I just am old enough to have seen a ton of these predictions come, and I'm still here, so thinking it's not right. I'm not saying that the world won't end someday. It could. You know, we could have a comet that could come crashing into the earth, and just like that could happen. The sun could decide to expand and we'd heat up really, really hot, and then we'd all die. I mean, it could happen. The end of the world could happen. It's just, I'm just not buying that it's on September 23rd, especially because they're talking about some rogue planet somehow. I mean, I think we'd know by now. We'd be able to see it coming. If it was a planet was going to crash into our, some of these, they're talking about, what is the Planet X's official name? Yes? Ah, yes. I do get that people have always throughout time been freaked out by, what else happened this summer? The eclipse. Remember the eclipse? I mean, in the old days, an eclipse happened and people were like, ah! Like, this is a sign that we're blah, blah, blah. No, it's just because the moon got in between us. And anyway. So, the eclipse was probably not, I mean, because we could see it coming for a long time. Now, if the eclipse happened tonight, and all the scientists are like, what the heck's happening? Now, that might be a sign. But if we can see it coming for a long time, then yeah, it's probably not a sign of something. Okay, so anyway, again, I actually believe that someday this Earth is going to come meet its end. I just am not buying it's going to be 2 days from now. Okay, So how can I crash this? There's a slide earlier that went past that was like, I can kill West Nile. That was some teacher's joke. I'm not sure it's appropriate, but basically it's like this. If you destroy the patient, it will destroy the disease. So like, how can you destroy West Nile? Well, you can kill the patient, and then the West Nile won't be able to live anymore. Okay, but that's not an acceptable solution, right? Same idea with the function. Again, that's a little too violent even for me. So with the function, if I put in something that is fine and solves the equation, but it kills the function like that, then that's not okay to use that. You can't use -1 as a solution to this. Even though it might work, it doesn't work because you're not allowed to have a 0 on the bottom. All right. So the two things you have to watch out for on these types of questions are, can I crash this function by putting a 0 on the bottom? Can I make the bottom 0 here? Yeah, if I stick in, I got to be careful. I don't want to stick in what? -1. So basically, I can put in everything except x cannot be -1. So sometimes you focus on the things that you can't be, but you forget that it can be a whole bunch of other things. A domain is actually what it can be. So if you just said that, I wouldn't be able to give you the credit for it. Okay, the domain of this is, put a big R, comma, and you're saying all real numbers work except it can't be -1. That's our way of saying everything works except it can't be this one thing. That's how you do a domain. Now, where do they get more complicated? Only when you have a square root. Because square roots don't have a 0 on the bottom. That's not their issue. What do you think screws up a square root? If the thing in here becomes what? Negative. If you get a negative in there, if you come up with an answer and the answer comes up to like 7 and you actually put it in and you realize, oh crap, I have the square root of a negative, then 7 wasn't really your answer. You might have thought it was because you solved and you got that, but if it causes the function to die, then it isn't okay. So what's our domain on these? We say that what's inside there needs to stay positive. What's a math way of saying that? Needs to be greater than or equal to 0. By the way, 0 is okay. The square root of 0 isn't a bad thing. It's just 0. Okay? So you would say the stuff under there has to be bigger than or equal to 0. And the stuff underneath any denominator needs to not be 0. All right, so those are two things you got to be able to do. You take your denominators and say, those denominators can't be 0. And you take your square roots and you say, what's under the root has to be bigger than or equal to 0. That'll solve all of these. So let's look at this one. Does it have a square root? No, so I'm not going to worry about square roots. It has a denominator. So I set that denominator better stay not 0. So I say x squared minus 36. And this is kind of fun because I think this is the first time you've actually probably done an equation that doesn't use an equals or a less or a greater. It uses a not equals. That should not equal 0. And you just solve it all the way through with a not equal sign in it. So I'm going to add 36 to both sides. X squared not equal to 36. And then I square root both sides. And x not equal to 6 is totally wrong. I forgot something. Absolute value is what I forgot, not plus and minus. Because square root of 36 is not plus and minus 6. This is the absolute value of x. I told you it's come up 6 times on different tests this year. Okay, it's gonna. So get used to this. When you do the square root of a variable, you need absolute value. Now I can break it into two things. Yes, there'll be a plus and a minus involved, but it's because of this. X is not equal to 6, and x is not equal to negative 6. That's saying if you stick 6 in here, it'll crash you. So you better not let it be 6. And if you stick -6 in here, it'll crash you. So you better not let it equal -6. And then oh, it's so sad if kids get all of that right, and then they are asked for the domain and they say x can't be -6 and x can't be 6, and they forgot to say what can it be. So you just put a big what? Big R. And if you make it a double one, that's the official way to say all real numbers. A double vertical line when you're drawing your R. All real numbers except it can't be -6 and it can't be 6. By the way, I will accept the number line representation of that. Do you get that would go like this? Can't be -6, can't be 6, but it can be everything else. If you don't like the other way, you can make it a number line. Because remember how we said there's 3 notations that we accept? That's one of them. A number line is one of the representations we'll accept. So I actually kind of like this way because I'm a visual person, like I think a lot of you are. And that shows me the answers a little better. This is a little more abstract. If you want to do it that way, it's totally okay. All right, so we're doing this page, which I already did a lot of, and this page, and one of these, because these are that weird one where you got to pick what A is and stuff. We'll just do this first one. That's going to be one of your tougher test questions. So we should practice it. Only that one, and then we're done. Okay? So those 2 pages of domains and that one. Now, just to clarify, this is not due tomorrow because, again, the Rosh Hashanah thing, we're giving you plenty of time. This isn't due till Monday when you take your test. So bottom line, you should just keep doing your homework until the test, and the test is Monday. And this was the last day of new material. Okay, so I don't have to teach you anything else tomorrow. I can just review with you. And again, that won't be due, well, that's a Friday. Is tomorrow Friday? Please tell me tomorrow's Friday. Okay, good. So then, that'll be due on the day of the test also. Okay, congratulations, you've learned enough to take another test.